Hi, and welcome back to the second season podcast. My name is Jagger,
My name is Robin.
and today is one we've been excited about for quite a long time to talk about. We have the Miami Heat and overall offensive innovation in today's NBA.
The Miami Heat are 10th in the league in offense, which I think we would all say is very surprising given that Norman Powell's been their kind of highest usage player. Bam's missed a solid chunk of the season now. Hero hasn't played a game.
Yeah, I think just jumping in, even with Tyler Hero, I think 10th in offense would be a
I think
pretty big surprise for
that's
most people,
about
right?
if with that as like the pinnacle of your offense. I mean, if we compare them to what they were last year, right? Last year they were 21st in offense. So with, I mean, some slight upgrades in talent, you could say that bringing in Norman Powell is an upgrade, but it's not. That's not, I think, single-handedly going to take you up 11 spots in the offensive rankings.
Exactly. So we have their raw numbers, and then we dig in what exactly and who exactly is driving that effectiveness so far. And the big name that stands out is Norm Powell, right? And then you think about, okay, Norm Powell is your best offensive player. How is that working? Probably a lot of isolation drives, right? Well, the Heat have taken that principle and multiplied it by basically their entire roster.
The Miami Heat are currently third in the percentage of their plays, their isolation plays, with nearly 10% of all their possessions being considered an isolation.
Which is up from 17th last season.
The other big thing that we've noticed is that they are bottom of the league, 30th in pick and roll rate at 5%, which is incredibly low. And I think the lowest pretty much since tracking data has started.
Very,
For
very low.
so in the past like 10 years, this is the lowest pick and roll rate we've ever seen. The other thing is handoff rate, which is dropped again, which those two are often pretty kind of go together in a lot of ways. They're only 1.3% of their possessions are handoffs, which is really interesting given that Bam's kind of big calling card as an offensive player was this like big DHO game, right? He can pass, he can drive, drive out of it.
Basically,
Like that was his whole thing.
basically since Bam has become their starting center, right, over Hassan Whiteside back in the day, they've built their offense around Bam's decision making out of the high post DHO game. And yeah, to see that go down to only 1.3% of the possessions, which again, last in the NBA, is super jarring. I think that's important, really important to emphasize.
The other thing that really kind of stood out while we were looking at kind of these stats is how early in the shot clock they're taking most of their shots. They take 20.1% of their shots in the first, or actually, I guess it's 22.7% of their shots in the first 6 seconds of the shot clock, which puts them comfortably in the top two or three teams in the league. And another 24% of their shots are taken in those next 3 seconds. So if they're taking, nearly half their shots in the first 12 seconds of the shot clock. I mean, actually less than that in the first 10 seconds of the shot clock, essentially. Um, that's a that's an incredibly high rate for just any offense.
To put it just in a simpler one number, we have issues with pace as a stat, right? But their average number of possessions per game is 105.5, which is first in the NBA. So they are getting up and down the floor.
After we noticed this, we kind of dug into the film. And what we noticed was a lot of kind of a lot of their principles are now kind of based on just attacking who's in front of you. They're not trying to bring up other defenders into to be involved in actions. It's just beat your guy off the dribble and kind of get into these action and get into this kind of wheel and churn effect really quickly. Kind of the example possession that really stood out to me as happening kind of over and over and over again is that the moment someone gets the rebound, they start dribbling up to four and they'll immediately pass it up to someone on the wing. It doesn't matter which wing, either wing, and that person will try to attack whoever is in front of them.
Exactly. And that is usually counted as an isolation possession, right? That's not, when you think of an isolation possession in basketball, you're going to think about, if you're a younger fan, like Carmelo catching at the mid post, couple jab steps, triple threat, might make a move, might shoot it after 9 seconds come off the shot clock. That's what most people think of it as isolation. The Heat, like you just said, are getting it up the floor and attacking almost immediately whoever's in front of them.
Then if they don't kind of have something on that initial attack or it's not a good matchup, they'll immediately try to swing it to the other side of the corner, like try to get all the way to the corner and have the player in the opposite corner from the wing that they initially passed up to attack the baseline.
then during all this, we noticed the other four players on the floor aren't stagnant, right?
Yeah.
There's a very coordinated, choreographed, almost dance going on here with all five players on the court.
There's people cutting, kind of doing a lot of 45 cuts or cuts along the baseline. There's people lifting out of corners, and they're often, when they attack off the wing, the player that's in the corner on that same wing will lift up behind them. And one of the first passes that they go to, if they don't kind of get something, like get to a shot that they're happy with in that ice or in that like drive or whatever,
Initial drive.
in
Yeah.
that initial drive, is they'll be looking for that lift behind them.
And they will almost turn and make that pass without looking. Like they know that player is lifting and filling directly behind them.
What's so interesting about that is that this kind of offensive system of always just driving and not really kind of getting into the normal pick and roll handoff game that most NBA offenses are built around is that it really kind of makes the traditional help rules and principles that teams operate with very like it messes with them a little bit. We've seen in the past,
especially in the regular season when there aren't very many heavy scouts, there's value in just being flat out different in how you attack.
a really good example of that is it's become very popular to help off the strong side on drives and on pick and rolls and to rake in on passes constantly. And when they do that, it really kind of when the opponents or when opposing teams and players do that, they'll kind of turn around, as we just said, and find that person that's lifting up behind them. And then that person is attacking someone who's doing kind of like a half closeout, trying to recover back from that rake. And that's I think the kind of main thing that they're looking for with these isolations is to get either the Heat player with the ball in motion before in motion before they get the ball, or have the defender in motion trying to recover back to the offensive player before they make their attack.
Absolutely. I think their general pace in terms of when they shoot the ball on the shot clock is very high, but also their half court pace, the concept of every movement, every action being lightning quick. And like you said, they're almost always attacking with the defender either closing out towards them or wrong footed in some way, which is part of their up-tempo ideology.
The other thing that is kind of become very apparent is that they're often playing with someone on the baseline. And that definitely that kind of opens up a lot of driving lanes. And you'd think traditionally that like, oh, you're trying to do this like spread out offense, like we want spacing, you don't want someone on the baseline. But when you have someone kind of attacking individually and you don't have two players already kind of coming together, every kind of foot around them matters a lot. And so by having someone on the baseline, they're taking one defender that would be in position to either help at the nail
dig down
or something like that, and they're forcing them to kind of sit along the baseline, and they'll step up occasionally, but they're often playing with either Khalil Ware, who's a good enough finisher to be dangerous in the dunker spot, or someone who's a strong enough passer to kind of pass out of those situations or kind of flare out after the person steps up to get to a corner three.
And the beauty of the Heat offense is what we just described in that type of player, they have multiple of. And that ability to be very versatile, finish at the rim, make a pass out of that dunker spot position, or flare out to the three-point line. Just about every single one of their rotation players has that capability, which we can get into in a larger conversation of building a system around your roster. And I think that's something done very effectively with that specific example.
What's really interesting here is how this system kind of maximizes having a lot of players who can get to kind of shots in isolation or shots off or shots, out of like just essentially on their own and kind of create shots. And what's interesting is that a lot of these times these aren't like the traditional shots that we see as like super high value of like at the rim or getting fouled, but the Heat have one of the highest rates of shots. I think they're actually first in the league in shots in that range of just outside of the rim. So just outside of that 5 feet. So 5 to 9 feet. They're first in the league at 15.2 field goal attempts per game, which is first by nearly 2.5 field goals a game. So they're kind of living in that kind of just like floater or like jump hook range.
Which for most NBA defenses, that's a huge win to have your opponent take shots from there, unless it's players of the likes of Luka, Trey, these really, really high level floater converters. That's usually a really inefficient shot for most NBA players. But yeah, the Heat are not only taking a ton of shots there, they seem to be making them too, right?
What's interesting is we've seen another team really live in that kind of 5 to 9 foot floater area, and that was the Grizzlies over the past few years. And when we started to dig into that, we noticed that the Grizzlies have incredibly similar play type distributions last year.
Incredibly similar. So just starting from the top again with pace, the Memphis Grizzlies in the 24-25 season had a pace of 103.3, and which is very fast. That was first in the league. And then Robin, you can take us through the more specific shot clock data.
So the shot clock data on NBA.com is split up into a handful of different categories. The first one is 24 to 22 seconds, which that one is predominantly based off of like runouts and getting steals. But the important ones for us are the 22 to 18 range, where the 24-25 Memphis Grizzlies shot 18.8% of their shots, which was second in the league, and the 18 to 15 range, where they shot 21.8% of their shots, which would have been first that year. Incredibly similar to what we're seeing with the Miami Heat. And the Heat have actually kind of increased that rate and have done it even more. But it's that same, like get down the floor early, get into your offense quickly, and again we see really high isolation rates and really low pick and roll and handoff rates.
So last season, the Memphis Grizzlies were 9th in isolation, and this season they're down to 22nd. Similarly, as we just talked about in transition, so that wasn't actually first last season. They were second in transition percentage this season, down to 6th, so slight drop off there. And then, again, similar to the indicators we're seeing with the Miami Heat, their pick and roll rate is 30th, or was 30th, rather, in the NBA last season, and they were 30th in handoff percentage. So this got us thinking, like, what's going on here? What's the through line? Is there maybe a coach or something, maybe more ambiguous?
A consultant of sorts?
Perhaps. And would this consultant possibly have a connection to the College of St. Joseph's in Maine, the Division III basketball team? If you're a fan of the Grizzlies or the Miami Heat, you might know where we're going with this.
The through line between all three of these teams is one
Noah LaRoche. So Noah LaRoche first popped up in the depths of basketball analytics circles with the College of St. Joseph's, located in Maine. As we mentioned, they are a D3 basketball program. And there's a couple videos floating around on the internet of this interesting style, which doesn't really utilize many pick and rolls, not very many handoffs, but a lot of isolation. And most importantly, this kind of wheel concept where all 5 players on offense seem to be on a bit of a string moving in concert together.
It's a really normal kind of concept to kind of view defenses as moving on a string. When one person rotates, the other person rotates. And this kind of takes that concept and takes it on offense, where you want to keep certain areas of the floor filled and be constantly kind of attacking different areas of the floor and kind of forcing teams to always be in this kind of wheel of rotation spinning out of until you can eventually get to whatever shot you end up getting to.
Perpetual churn, you could think about it as just constant motion. So yeah, with the Monks, he was not a coach, but he was a consultant for this D3 basketball team, Noah LaRoche, who this was roughly in the 2017-2018 time span. And in 2025, last season's Memphis Grizzlies, he was an official assistant coach. And this season with the Miami Heat, he has been noted as a very strong consultant for their offensive system. And all of this makes sense. The Noah LaRoche fingerprints are all over these 2 NBA teams. And then, of course, going back to his Division III basketball little project. So now that we have the fundamentals of these offensive principles, we would like to expand upon what they have or how they've been included with teams in the past and how we believe they can be integrated in not only high-level offenses or just offenses in general going forward.
So the kind of like fundamental thing that this offensive approach is doing is empowering players to just attack and be aggressive and utilize their skill set and like their high skill level.
More specifically, the ability to dribble and create in some sense. And very important to note, this creation is done without the aid of, as we've noted many times, a pick and roll or handoff action, which the fundamental principle of those two basketball movements is creating interactions with multiple players on the floor. So by staying with isolation, you are intentionally leaving it in a one-on-one situation where the ball handler is attacking the defense. And with these spacing concepts we've talked about at length, they're maintaining that one-on-one advantage. And if there is any help from the defense, there's very clear passing angles out of that, which is going to be very important to note later. These passes are often very simple and very intuitive.
Additionally, kind of the real emphasis on pace and kind of getting into that churn is why these isolations are effective. Traditionally, isolation is a pretty low effectiveness, like a low efficiency kind of play type. But because they're getting into these isolations either in a mismatch, so like when, if you can think about the Heat, you'll have Andrew Wiggins attacking like a small guard that got matched up onto him in transition. Like the kind of prime example is like he'll be guarding the best player on the other team. The best player on the other team will take a shot and they'll be, behind the 3-point line or whatever. And Wiggins can just immediately run up the floor knowing that the pass is going to find him and the person defending him is going to be your, I don't know, your Trae Young or your just whatever, like, not to pick on Trae Young, but like whatever, like, not
your team's fourth or fifth best defender, probably, most likely, right?
Yeah, and most of the time that person isn't physically capable of like competing with Andrew Wiggins, who is, big and strong and can get to
one of the best physical
yeah.
physical athletes in the NBA. Yeah.
Or the other example is Norman Powell, who like will be often kind of the other person that fills that other wing if that first attack from Andrew Wiggins doesn't get to anything. They'll swing it to him, and then he might have, a slow-footed center or whoever on him, and they can just attack.
Yeah, we can just go through the roster. Jaime Jaquez coming off the bench, Nikola Jovic, even Pele Larson, who's been a fill-in starter. He has this dribble drive ability as well. And I think the biggest through line with these players specifically, not that any of them are bad passers, but we don't think of any of these guys as the best high-level passers in the NBA.
Except for, like, Jaquez has shown to be quite a good passer. And I think that's why he's thriving so much in the system in a lot of ways, is that he can take this empowerment of, a lot of his game is this like Kobe, I'm going to isolate, kind of get to these really pretty moves.
In the half court,
which is really good for him, which it works really well in this offensive system. But he also kind of has this passing ability that lets him really kind of supercharge that offense and have.
I think that if
really
we're going to talk about Jaime,
rate.
we have to talk about the downhill transition stuff as well, right? He
Yeah.
fits into that almost like a glove. As soon as he checks in with 7 minutes left in the first, every single defensive rebound, the ball gets in his hands and he's pushing it down the throats of the opposing team. And again, able to take advantage of that dribbling ability, scoring ability. Once he gets downhill, he has the ability to finish, which is big. It's not a Ben Simmons transition, as we call it, where he's just trying to get to the dotted line and flip it to some shooter, look for a bailout pass somewhere. No, he is attempting to score, which is very, very important. And then if that's not there, the pass.
And he's another one of these players that really thrives in that kind of 5 to 9 foot range where you can get to these little spin backs and jump hooks.
We talked about the Kobe
like
thing.
Little fade. Yeah, these like Kobe jumps, but like instead of doing them from like 18 feet the way Kobe did, he's doing them from 8 to 12 feet.
No, yeah, the pivot bag, the dream shakes, up and unders. That's Jaime land, and yeah, he feasts there as well. So yeah, he might be the quintessential player for this system. If you had to maybe not pick a star. But I think again, as I was saying, aside from Jaime, none of these are very, very high level passers. So the system, which has this very intentional movement pattern, very predictable movement pattern, the passes that are available, again, are predictable, which has its pros and cons. But from the offense's perspective, they know almost without a doubt when they figure a shot isn't there or they try a drive and can't really get anything, they know exactly where a teammate will be, and that's a function of their half court pace, is very quick actions out of that.
Yeah, they can switch sides of the floor really quickly, and I think the most important pass that I've kind of identified while watching the film for them is that lift guy behind them. So whenever, almost any time that they drive, there is someone filling in behind them to kind of make that. And since it's an isolation against only one player, there's very rarely a defender kind of behind them, right? Like you're if
Because
you're
it's not a really normal NBA action.
yeah, it's not like
Defenses aren't keyed on that.
yeah, they're not keyed on like, oh, I'm gonna turn back and like catch this lift guy every time. And in doing that, they kind of have like a bit of a safety valve of when they make these attacks, there's always gonna be this pass. And
I think that's a great way of putting it, a
they
safety valve.
they do a really good job of also like they're not just it's not the only pass that they're gonna make. Obviously they have, as we said a bit earlier, they like to have someone on the baseline, and that player is normally Kalel Ware or Nikola Jovic, or in a lot of interesting cases is Pelle Larsson too.
Yeah, I think it's important. We should illustrate, flesh out that baseline player, like what they're doing on these actions. So if it's a drive to the same side of where this baseline player is, they're either going to cut under the basket, a little baseline cut, or they're, like we've noted, they're going to flare out. And so that creates some indecision in the defense as well, not knowing, is this going to be, do I have to stay near the basket or get ready to close out for a three?
And that makes, the person of normally the defender of that, the defender that's on the baseline is now worried about like, oh, do I have to follow my guy? Like when I step up, are they just going to have an easy dump off? It really opens up a lot of like the obvious passing lanes in front of them. And it's only when the initial attack doesn't work or there aren't any like real great options there, and they're either kind of having to pivot back into not great shot or they need to do something else, is that they have this release valve behind them to come back. And then they do a really good job of that player that made that initial attack getting out of the way and pulling their defender. Like they'll cut through the offense a lot of the time instead of just like flaring straight back to the 3-point line that's closest. They'll go through the offense. They'll go through to the other side of the floor, other side of the court, and that kind of drags their defender with them and lets the person that the lift guy start his attack, which gets that kind of circular churn going.
The wheel starts going, and that cut kind of through the defense is really their only intentional crossing of players. Like we talk about like what a pick and roll and what a handoff is. Again, it's creating those multiple player interactions. They're doing that with function, I guess. It's just part of the system. And yeah, so I think overall we've kind of settled on where this Heat offense is right now and where a theoretical higher offense could go with this. This is a floor raising system, right? Where it's predictable for the offense, but when you get into a series setting, predictability can be scouted very well. So what are some ways that we feel like defenses can counter this offensive system?
Well, I think a great example of that is from the Heat Knicks game on the 14th, where Mikal Bridges was able to jump that kind of passing, that like pass up to the wing or reversal from that initial pass up to the wing in like kind of semi-transition twice in that game. And he knew exactly where the ball was going. He knew exactly what he was looking for. And both times he just immediately picked it off, ran it out for a pick six or something like that. Like that kind of level of predictability is, I think, where this system might start to struggle. But it also, I think it's pretty obvious that both those passes were kind of, if you go back and watch them, that they were made with a little bit of like, you probably like, I think one of them was Pelle Larsson, who probably should have seen Bridges just sitting there and been aware enough to not make that pass, right? And I think in terms of like, we haven't actually seen this system really like make it to the playoffs and really kind of go through that fire of another team really sitting down and looking at everything. But one kind of data point we have is that last year throughout the year, that Grizzlies offense got worse and worse.
There's a predictable line with it going down as the months of the season went on, and eventually with the demise of Taylor Jenkins as a culmination.
However, what I'm really excited to see is that this offense with the Heat is very likely to make it to the playoffs at this point. So we're going to kind of see what teams can do. And in terms of like what I've seen that I think I would start with is sitting on that kind of pass back out as like when that person is lifting, cut and like really essentially play ball line between the defender or the lift guy and the person that made the initial drive. So really make that. I mean, I think you can almost pretty comfortably gamble on that pass anyway.
I think that goes for all four other defenders on the floor and they're either man or zone that they're covering, the system isn't necessarily complicated, right? The rules of what they're doing, especially the fundamental baseline of what the monks were doing at the D3 level, the wheel it's pretty predictable. So like we were saying, that predictability goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think kind of a larger takeaway of that and the system in general is that it's more or less taking the decision making out of individual players and putting it on the system as a whole. So we'll go back to the common theme of this team not having the greatest individual creators ever. However, this system creates, like we called it, valves or outlets to where if you don't have a shot for yourself, you don't necessarily have to be creative. The offense doesn't really have a lot of creativity in it. The rules of the motion and the off-ball movement are pretty set in stone. There's not a lot of randomness, which when we go into a playoff setting, there's the famous line from Mike Budenholzer a couple of years ago where he said just like play random. And a lot of people poked fun at that as like, oh, this guy has no idea what he's doing. He's just telling his players to play random with variance. But again, connecting all the way back to our initial conversation, predictability again goes both ways.
So we've kind of said why we think this might be a bit of a floor raising offense. And while I definitely believe that, I do want to kind of push back and discuss what this might look like with some like really high level talent that is actually kind of optimized for this kind of system.
Exactly. So we're not just playing fantasy basketball, picking 5 really good players. We're thinking about this system specifically and under these same ideas and who could thrive in them reasonably.
So I think we last year with the Grizzlies, that's kind of like I think you could argue that they had like the level of talent necessary to make this like a really good offense, but that talent didn't fit very well at all. Like Ja Morant and Desmond Bane want to play in pick and roll. And we saw those two players really struggle.
Not only do they want to, they're effective pick and roll players, both of them.
And we saw those two players really kind of struggle with this system last year. Whereas on the other hand, we had Jaren Jackson Jr., who I think is an immaculate fit for the system. That is someone who wants to drive,
5
to
to 9,
and go, loves that 5 to 9 jump hook area, and is good
push
at
shots.
it. Yeah, those little lefty push shots, but it can also shoot, because I do think there is a having like really true kind of the ability to put all 5 guys on the perimeter and making that baseline guy someone who's also a threat to kind of flare back out to the 3-point line and get open that way while the person in the corner is lifting is really important. So,
and I think just to build on that, Zach Edey in the system is kind of another antithesis to the effectiveness. When Zach Edey is in the dunker, flares at the 3-point line, you're just not really concerned about that, which has ramifications for the entire offense itself. It basically bogs it down.
So if we're kind of putting together a team that really thrives with the system, I think we have to start at the top, obviously. I think the kind of like superstar that I would want in a system like this is someone who is really, really capable and like excellent at getting to their own shot. If not, they may not be the greatest passer. And kind of the vision that I see for that is like Raptors Kawhi Leonard, right? So like obviously that's like a top 3 player, but I'm talking like I want to see what like I want to go through the kind of the thought process of building like
the logical extreme
a
of
championship level like real contender
Exactly.
that is like built with this offensive system in mind. And to do that, you normally need a top 5 to 3 player. So I think the vision for that is someone like Kawhi Leonard as this like excellent isolation player. If they catch it with like a half step on you in your closeout, they're either getting to the basket, they're going to push you off, they're going to shove you off with their off arm, they're going to just torch you. And if they have to create from isolation, that's going to be a problem too, right? Like they are good enough to get to any shot that like a shot that they feel safe and comfortable with. So that's kind of like the top player. We also already discussed that like
I think it's important to note that that top player, we didn't pick like, I don't know, maybe this is a theoretical player, but like that type of player with a passing ability of LeBron. Like this is a capable passer, but not one of the best in the NBA.
The next player that I would want there is someone like Jaren Jackson Jr., a big that can shoot and can really like run the floor hard or run the floor hard and get out in transition if they need to, is a real big problem on mismatches for the other team. So like if you get a 2 or a 3 on Jaren Jackson Jr., he can just kind of back them down and get to his like spinning jump hooks, and it's going to be
It's like a 65%,
it's going to be a good
70%
shot.
And again, Jaren Jackson, not known for his passing, right? But in this system where the passes are kind of laid out for you on a silver platter, that's not really the biggest issue in the world.
Mm-hmm. And from there, we have those. I think those would be kind of our two best players, probably, right?
You're guaranteed whatever.
Yeah, these are our two 35%
35%.
maxes. These
Yeah.
guys locked in,
Mhm.
two kind of in that archetype. And what I think is, if you kind of built out that team normally, everyone would be saying, "Oh, they need a point guard. They need someone who can play pick and roll and like get us into our offense and
Someone who can dribble that orange thing up and down.
yeah." But instead, I want to say, what if we went and got two like hard driving, can shoot, like almost two essentially like combo guards, right? Probably a bit of extra size on them. So like, I mean, the dream is like two. Or I guess like for me, it's like Ryan Rollins and Norman Powell, right? Like, what if those are our guards? So we got some real size. Like, well, I guess Powell doesn't quite have the size, but like Ryan Rollins has some size.
Kind of like the stereotypical sixth man archetype, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of what we're going for.
Yeah,
Just a bucket
Yeah.
that can get to his shot.
Get to his shot. Hopefully, one of those players wouldn't be left-handed, so that they could stand on opposite sides of the floor. But theoretical players, right? And so now we have these two kind of rugged guards who can kind of do everything. They're not really traditional point guards in any sense. Well, I guess Ryan Rollins has kind of become that, but like
the best version of Jordan Clarkson.
Yeah, the best version of Jordan Clarkson. Not great. Don't have to be exceptional passers. And at the 5, I think you either want to be able to play kind of another 4 next to Jaren. So like, I don't know, like Boris Diaw, right? Like that's that's the joke that we've been making all week is like, I want like Boris Diaw or like Batum or someone like that. Batum is an excellent passer, but like someone who could really operate as that like person to like swing the ball to the other side of the floor.
A connector, right?
A connector
the phrase
who can shoot and can, drive if he needs to. That kind of player, like maybe Andrew Wiggins or something like that.
I think again, Hawkes is kind of what we're looking for here. It's that player with some level of passing ability, but just can't really quite create their own shot efficiently enough to be that high-end player that we're discussing. So kind of filling in the blanks of what we have left.
And so now, where does that team get us? Like, where do you think that kind of a team, like, we'll just fill out the rest of the roster with like average contender level bench guys,
exactly
good players, but like nothing earth shattering. They're not going to like totally change it. Like,
as most championship rosters, your fate isn't really decided by 7th, 8th men most of the time. I think this thought experiment is exceptionally interesting because it does take what we're talking about to that logical extreme. These are all very, very capable, quick hitting isolation players, but almost all of them have that passing deficiency. So it's kind of the unstoppable force, unmovable object thing of like, can this team hit enough shots, get enough transition looks to have a passable offense without really being able to create much more than that creatively?
And by passable, we mean like it's a real
passable,
like championship contender,
which is like
they're gonna have to be like a top 7,
five.
top 7 to top 5 offense, right? And I think this is a bit of a logical extreme. It's like we're taking the like lack of like primary on-ball offensive creation or like,
but I think that's really important because that's what the Heat are right now, and that's what they're doing with middling to high middling level NBA players.
I think the fear or what would happen if you took it to that extreme is that the ability to kind of flip sides of the court would start to break down without slightly better passing.
Yep.
The more I think about it, the more I'm kind of realizing that like they do have Davion Mitchell, they do have Jaime Jaquez, who are both like solidly above average passers. Like,
I think we can call those
like
lubricators.
Yeah, I would put Davion at like average for a point guard, but like true point guard average, right? Like he can get you into your offense if he needs to. He's not going to be that much of a
threat. These
like,
aren't Cam Thomas players where just like the pass could be right there and it's still going to be a step back 19-footer.
Right? This is someone who can really pass. And then Jaquez, who is like actually a very good passer. So I think when you get to that kind of logical extreme, it really comes down to the individual players.
Individual shot making.
Yeah, right? Individual shot making, right? Does that level of shot making, like at this point, would we be better off just like creating a more interesting offense and getting someone who can really pass?
So let's put a bookmark in that, because that's kind of where this thought leads us to. Yeah.
Well, I don't even think we have to put a bookmark in it. Like, I think we dig into it now, right? Like,
Well, I wanted to discuss like the 2021 Clippers, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
This is not exactly what we've laid out for you in this logical extreme, but about as close as you can get in a realistic team building context, where it's Kawhi, Paul George at the top, who in 2021 were like top isolation players, shot creators, not the most capable high level passers though. And then around that, it's players like Marcus Morris, Pat Bev, players who can move the ball, but again, not the most intuitive passers. So we've kind of seen this before. And the biggest criticism, not only externally with that team, but we heard it for years, Kawhi chafing in the media of, I need a point guard. And they churned through what Rajon Rondo made an appearance there, the corpse of John Wall, who, quote unquote point guard.
Was that still a Reggie Jackson year?
Exactly. So
also Reggie Jackson, another one of those players that I think would have fit into this system pretty well.
Exactly. So we've seen, maybe not again to the extreme that we've laid out, but we've seen versions of this, and it always comes down to just being a little stiff and slow in the half court, that fluidity of connector ability, right? That's why Batum is like essential. He was essential for those teams. Freaking 35-year-old Nick Batum being the linchpin of a championship contender, just because he could make quick decisions. And so we see that in just natural team building, when just a little bit of passing is involved, how much that unlocks for an offense.
Well, what's been so different about these Heat teams, or this Heat team compared to like those teams? Like, do these Heat teams really have like that much more passing, or
is it the system? Right?
Is it the system? Like, I think it's because, as we said earlier, this Heat team kind of has outperformed what we thought it would be. And is that something that's going to continue? Are they really kind of at the peak of what they can be, at least in terms of their offense?
I think yes. I think this is Spo wringing the wet towel as an analogy about as much as it can be wrung, given what their roster is right now. Taking these Noah LaRoche principles, injecting them into, again, these players on this team, and it really, really maximizing what they have so far. Again, like a top 10 offense with this talent, especially since Tyler Hero has not played yet, I think we should reiterate how big of a deal that is.
And while we're focused on offense today, I think there is kind of an interesting part of that like theoretical team that we built earlier of like, that's a defense.
Jaren Jackson and Kawhi is like your two best offensive players,
right? Like, oh my God, can we build a defense here?
And
right?
so which plays into the transition, and of course basketball is always tied together, offense and defense. It's really hard to divorce those in the conversation.
So I think it would be interesting to see someone kind of really take these principles and like really go with them. And I think there's a lot more to explore with these principles, but actually adding some complexity to them, which is something that we've actually kind of seen a few times.
Many times throughout the last 20 years, especially. I think the place to start is the Rick Adelman Kings, who many just casual fans and hardcore fans in general know as the team that was just really not quite good enough in the early 2000s. But their offense pioneered a lot of what we're talking about, with empowering all 5 players on the floor to dribble, pass, shoot, and make decisions. But with the added wrinkle of a lot of off-ball movement and what we mentioned earlier, which is not something we see with this current Heat and Grizzlies, a lot of crossing multiple player interactions, so pick and rolls and handoffs. So infusing these concepts of, or the baseline concept of empowering players to make decisions, but adding in that complexity, that creativity, unpredictability. And then we get to what some would say is the pinnacle of this idea, the beautiful game Spurs, who in the 2012, 2013, and 2013, 2014 seasons are known for having one of the most beautiful offenses centered around aging Tony Parker, aging Tim Duncan, very young Kawhi. So no really high level of individual creators.
Manu Ginobili.
Aging Manu Ginobili.
My favorite player ever.
Both of our favorite. We could do.
We'll
have the Manu episode.
We'll have a Manu episode eventually.
The point is, though, this was a very deep team centered around a 9 to 10 man rotation that just had a lot of really, really smart, intuitive passers shooters, and dribblers. Again, with unpredictable movement, unpredictable decisions, and valuing what we call the point 0.5, or really the Spurs pioneered this idea, the 0.5 basketball, where it's every decision is made in less than half a second, whether it's pass, shoot, dribble. And when you have a 9-man rotation who can execute in that system, it creates a lot of randomness or perceived randomness, but it's really just quick decisions on the fly, which is incredibly difficult to defend against. And then what we kind of see is the pinnacle of these concepts of adding player movement, ball movement, and decision making on top and screening, much more screening. So more player interactions, right? Creating that complexity, plus a generational offensive talent. We have the pre-KD Warriors, who in 2014, 2015, and the following season, 2015, 2016, had a +8 offensive rating relative to the league average at that time. Just ridiculous numbers. And I think the big things that pop for those Warriors teams is just how little pick and rolls they ran. They were 30th in the league both seasons at around 10% of their plays being pick and rolls.
Which is still double what this current Heat team is. Which
exactly.
Is so crazy,
I
right?
think that's wild. The idea is, though, they're getting these off-ball interactions differently, with Steph running around, of course. We will do the Steph episode at some point. Legendary off-ball gravity, drawing attention, creating disruptiveness in the defense, miscommunication, missed assignments, but that requires decision-making to take advantage of. So the Warriors almost, you could call it,
took these concepts of dribble, pass, shoot, everyone can make decisions, everyone is doing things, everyone is empowered to make decisions, essentially, right? Like, and that's something that we've heard a lot with this kind of Warrior system in general over the years. And I mean, even harkening back to our Kuminga episode, that was always the big struggle for a lot of players coming into this system. Like,
it just requires such a high level of intelligence and passing ability.
Because you're going to be making decisions either with the ball in your hands or without the ball in your hands. You're always having to evaluate what's going on around you
to capitalize on these advantages that aren't preordained.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think that's because Steph is creating these advantages, but he's not the one directly capitalizing on them. The creation is almost outsourced. That's why Draymond and Iguodala, even like Sean Livingston, they were such important players, because they were able to capitalize on the outsourced advantage creation. They weren't creating the advantage, but they were taking advantage of it with their very good passing.
Which I think what is so interesting about this is that kind of the fundamental thing that we see with all these really good offenses are people who are good at making decisions on the basketball court. And I think that's a little bit where I see the ceiling of this LaRoche offense, is that it does kind of, it empowers people to make decisions and do things, but it lacks...
It's not their individual decisions, though. They're almost being, like we said before, it's being preordained by the offense itself.
Mm-hmm. It lacks a certain level of like spontaneity and the ability to kind of like, essentially the way that I have kind of narrowed it down in my mind is we've talked before about kind of second side creation. People who can take like a half step advantage and turn that into a really good shot. And what this system is trying to do is take a bunch of players who are good at that kind of second side creation and let them do that as much as they can. And that's kind of what this churn lets you do. But where it breaks down, or maybe not even where it breaks, actually, I think this might be a feature of it, is that the first person to kind of create that half step advantage doesn't need to be like a generational talent to get a half step advantage, because of a lot of factors in the NBA of like rising skill levels, the officiating kind of leaning a lot on offense, right? There's a lot of reasons why
that creates viable offense, that half step, right?
Mm-hmm. And so this Heat system is really just creating that half step over and over and over and over and over again, and trying to get as many players into the system that can maximize that half step. And I think if you look at their roster, that's really what their roster is made up of, is these players who are really good at this kind of second side creation, catch while their defenders kind of doing a bit of like half closing out to them, or they're catching on the move, just the tiniest little bit of separation, and they can turn that into a really good shot.
I think that's a really great way of articulating it. They are a roster of, on what most teams, they would be second to third options. And the Heat have like 7 or 8 of those guys.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it does. We've seen the churn effect before in offenses, right? Like going back to the Quinn Snyder Jazz, where it's starting with a static pick and roll with Donovan Mitchell or Mike
Mm-hmm.
Conley and Rudy Gobert at the top. And then from that half step advantage in the pick and roll, if something isn't there for either the primary creator or Rudy at the rim, it's kick out. And you have these players like Joe Ingles, Bojan Bogdanovic, who are capable of attacking these half steps. And that's, again, kind of what we're seeing with the Heat,
Mm-hmm.
with
Yeah.
the churn, with the added variant of the preordained motion
Mm-hmm.
and wheel concept.
Yep. So the next thing I want to talk about is kind of focusing back on this Heat team. What do we think this is going to look like when we get to the playoffs? Where do we think this might fall short? Where do we think it might succeed? Does it really kind of depend on the matchup? How do we think this is going to go?
Well, I think how our conversation has gone so far, I think we've strongly implied, like we've thrown around the term floor raising, which means that it can get your offense to a certain degree, the floor of it, which is great for the regular season and just winning on random Tuesdays in Sacramento, right? When you're in the playoffs, though, what really matters is that ceiling raising. What pushes your offense to that championship, call it top five
Top
offense in
five
the
on one
league.
side, top 10 on the other.
Exactly, that true championship level. And I think a lot of what we've discussed talk about the deficiencies in that floor raising, in that it doesn't have a lot of variance. It doesn't have a lot of creativity outside of maybe the first initial action in transition, where a player can be individually creative, but that's not really an entire offensive system.
Well, one thing with the Heat is that they do still have Tyler Hero, who's supposed to come back eventually.
I think that's really big to note.
I think it'll be interesting to see whether or not we've seen pick and roll players, and I would very much classify Tyler Hero as at least last season was a big time pick and roll player. That's where he did his damage. And we saw Tyler last year. Tyler Hero was really good, like really, really good last year. How is he going to integrate into this offense? Is this offense going to kind of keep its principles while he's on the floor? Or is it going to be something where it's just kind of like the Hawkes minutes, where on the second unit they kind of really go to this system, but on the primary offense they kind of go back to something a little bit more traditional?
What do you think will happen? Because I think that's a really interesting. Like, is obviously Tyler Hero is not going to be in the dunker, just totally part of the system.
He's definitely. I mean, he's going to fill into
It's similar to the
Norman
Grizzlies.
Powell spot, right? Where I think right now, where Norman Powell is really good at this kind of system, having someone who is more capable of kind of utilizing this, utilizing a screen, and when things aren't going great, being able to go back on kind of having your best two players interact between Bam and Hero. And I mean that's kind of another kind of issue with this system is it does make it harder for your best players to be interacting with each other. So like whenever you want them to, right? Like when you're running a pick and roll,
Because it fundamentally opposes that.
With like the advent of like Spain pick and rolls or Spain or stack, whatever you want to call them, and kind of more complex actions, it's become easier to get your two best players, no matter what positions they play, to be able to interact on offense.
Exactly. And again, the multiple player interaction creates complexity, chaos, more miscommunications for the defense, more opportunities for the offense when things get ostensibly predictable. This is what these are the reasons why sets are run in the first place, right? Creating defensive miscommunication and an advantage.
So what I hope we see this year is they're able to kind of blend these two things relatively seamlessly. And I mean, if any coach is going to be able to do it, it's probably Spo. But being able to kind of blend this system of empowering everyone to attack, but also finding ways to get more interaction between players in a way that doesn't immediately like stilt the system.
Again, but that's tough because we've talked about the strengths and weaknesses of these players, and more interactions again creates more complexity for the defense, but also for the offense to capitalize on that complexity. And having Tyler back help with some of that decision making burden a little bit, but again, are you at some point taking away from what got you here in the first place?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a very fine balance to walk for this Heat team. And
there's no one I'd rather see attempt walk that balance than Spo, right? Just from a coaching mind and knowing your personnel, knowing his system so well, but also being such a seasoned coach at this point. He's run so many different systems in his career. Just seeing how he approaches this. I think one more question I want to ask you about, because this has been a big point. I would say all from the most of the time we've been following basketball is transition in the regular season versus the playoffs, how it often loses its effectiveness, but also just in general seems to go down. Where do you think the Heat, or how do you think the Heat will fare with their very high pace in the playoffs?
So yeah, we have kind of seen as the season goes on, pace tends to slow down, and historically speaking, that like this like advantage of like playing super hard and like playing super fast has kind of dissipated a bit during the playoffs.
Because everyone's playing hard, right?
Yeah.
The inefficiency is no longer there.
But that may have all changed last year, where kind of like the big calling card and like the big, this is a copycat league thing that we're seeing everyone copy this year is just like playing unbelievably hard, right? Like everyone is just running, everyone is doing everything as hard as they can, copying the kind of like Pacers mentality of just like always pressuring you, always making it difficult, like never letting up, or the OKC mentality of just like we're constantly throwing these amazing defenders at you to just wear you down and like make it just unbelievably hard to play against us, either offensively or defensively.
War of attrition idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's not necessarily the skill, the tactics that are beating you down. It's the sheer physicality of running up and down a floor on a basketball court over and over again.
On top of like a really high skill level and like a lot of talent,
that's
right?
That's
like,
the given.
That's like, it's, it used to be like, oh, we're going to play all of our best players and just like the sheer skill level will beat you. And now it's like, okay, we're all really skilled. We're back to just
and we're all tryhards.
Yeah, who tries harder, who gives more of shit, like who is out there just, going.
Our top rotation players have this like Jose Alvarado mentality, which is kind of new for the league, right?
Yeah. And in response to that, we've seen a like big jump in pace this year, and we've seen like the kind of like huge foul rate bump that we saw with everyone just like playing really hard and
more fouls in the
fouling.
bonus.
Everyone's getting to the bonus quicker, right? I think the level of speed that they play with it's not just like one or two players just running it down your throat over and over again. It's different than that. It is a like principled approach of like we get the ball, dribble quickly up the floor, immediately pass up to the wing, right? If they can start to vary that where it's like, oh, sometimes we don't pass to the wing, sometimes we pass to the middle, or we pass to the wing and then the person that passed up like sprints past them and gets into like a quick handoff, like attacking the baseline, right? Like if they can kind of use that constant like real like high, like really getting the ball across the floor quickly,
system wide, all 5 players on the floor empowered to get the ball up quickly.
Yeah, getting into their offense quickly, which I think that's the fundamental reason that you're doing this, is that like every second earlier in the shot clock,
which we've known for a long time, just how much the individual efficiency falls off as each second ticks down.
Yeah, so every second in the shot clock that you are taking the shot like later and later, the lower efficiency you have. So that kind of concept of really getting across the floor, getting up across half court quickly, getting into the front court, getting into your offense quickly, I think that is something that we'll maintain.
I think that's a really great idea to think about, that all 5 players on the court having that empowered ability. It creates this like sinking ship, plugging the hole analogy, right? Where you think like, okay, we're going to take Hawkes away. Like we're just going to have a guy glued to him. He's not going to be able to run up and down. We're going to shove him a little bit, discourage him. All right, fine. Norm, take it up. Davion, take it up. Do the exact same thing. Jovic, even like,
yeah, or like you have Fontecchio up on the floor and your guy takes a half step in because he's worried about the person. And like another thing is that they often have, after they get someone onto the wings, there's someone that kind of cuts through the middle of the floor on like whatever, what I would call a slice cut or what you would call a suicide cut. And like they're not really there to like do anything. It's just like, oh, you should have someone fill the middle in transition. But like if you have like someone like Fontecchio on the wing, and then someone does that, and the person on Fontecchio takes even like a half step towards them, Fontecchio is just gonna launch that right over them, right? Like, yeah, there's so many like different ways for them to kind of utilize that.
Just to clarify, I called it a sacrifice cut. This is a PG show, not a suicide cut.
Oh God, no. Yeah, I call it a slice cut.
We can eat the demonetization.
Oh
for this
God,
one. The millions of dollars rolling in. Yeah.
But that level of if they can find more ways to utilize that pressure, I think it will maintain.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier, during that Knicks Heat game on the 14th, Bridges knew exactly where that pass was going, and that's like a regular season game on like a Tuesday or something, right? Or
So
no, or was that an NBA Cup game?
I
That was
think
an
that was
NBA.
an
Okay, never mind, never mind.
high
That's the
level
playoffs.
scouting,
That's we're here. He was
peak
locked in.
intensity.
But if
Your point still stands.
point
This is
stands,
a game in the flow of the regular season where he knew where that pass was going.
even if it was a little highlighted, it's just going to be more highlighted when we get to the playoffs. If literally all 5 players on the floor know exactly what's going to happen,
Okay.
essentially every like on 80% of their transition possessions.
I think this is a really important note in this conversation because we're talking about the huge deficiency with this team being the lack of variance and randomness, and they get that in transition, right? That's the one place where it does exist. So if transition is this truly fundamental team-wide thing that's not necessarily going to fizzle when some random player just wants to slow ISO, dribble the ball up slowly and get to their step back or whatever, get into a pick and roll, the clog toilet offense as we call it. If that's not even a conceptual thing on this team, there's not really a reason that it's going to stop.
Mm-hmm. So I think we will see that maintain as long as they can kind of keep their roster healthy and not end up in a situation where they're having to play 8 guys and it's totally screwed. But like that's a kind of separate issue, right? I think the biggest issue with this offense is that there will be times where a defense is like keyed in enough to kind of cut the churn off at one point or kind of like stop it at source with like one kind of heady defensive rotation or play.
Those half advantages become quarter advantages,
mm-hmm.
and eventually not an advantage. You're getting stonewalled.
Mm-hmm.
The better and better the defenses are.
Or if like I think there is probably a way to kind of maybe ever like I think fundamentally a lot of the time when you're watching this system work is that they're relying on the opponent kind of getting a bit confused with their help rotations based off of what they normally face, which is like more pick and roll, more handoff, right? How their rotations work there.
A very regular season issue.
Yeah. And I think you actually like don't need to change your rotations that much when you're facing the system. Where they're exactly coming from might be slightly different, but I think generally speaking the rotation should be like if you just kind of stick to your normal rotation, that will do a pretty good job of forcing them into those like 5 to 9 foot range, right? Which like they're taking a lot of and they're hitting them, but like that's also not it's not threes, it's not rims, it's not the rim, it's not fouls.
It's even for the best, as we talked about before, even for the best mid-range or short mid-range scorers in the league, it's really, really hard to generate efficient team-wide offense with those shots, largely based on the shots themselves being inefficient, but also the type of help that you're drawing that we've discussed at length. Okay, so I think we've fleshed out pretty well how we think the Heat could do. Let's put a bow on this, and I think this is where we disagree, right? In terms of where we're calling the Noah LaRoche principles of an offense. You seem to be a little higher on them the
LaRoche rules.
One could say you seem to be higher on the extremes of the fundamentals of what this offensive system could produce.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen this system. I think we've seen the system used to maximize talent that is not really like at the level of like a real contender. And I think it would be really interesting to see a team that's really kind of, if you get your kind of 1 and 2 star that like really work for a system like this, and then take it to its kind of like absolute extreme. Like I think I joked a couple weeks ago about how like I think this system could actually work pretty well for stars like the Magic have, right? Where you have these 2 players who are really like, Franz is this amazing second side creation guy. Paolo is, wants to isolate. If he could change his approach and his isolations a little bit, he could,
fast really, isolation.
Yeah, if he could just kind of speed it up a little bit and really get into it faster, and take advantage of how you have 2 like power forward size guys who are kind of someone's going to have a mismatch, so you can get to your isolation stuff like that, like. Or as we kind of talked about earlier, this like theoretical perfect team that like obviously would be
perfect for this system.
Perfect for this system, but even then, like that team would, if we just like picked those players out of a hat, like that would be a very strong team. Not just because the offensive level of offensive talent is pretty high, but like the level of defensive talent that we were talking about is like really, really good. And so I think it would be interesting to see this system applied to like a more idealized system, like kind of the way like Kerr's system.
It's idealized.
It's
for the
idealized
Warriors.
for Curry, right? So like, if you could take, if you know, this is never gonna happen, but like they had like the perfect star for this, and the perfect second star for this, and they really actually like focused on building a team that like was perfect for the LaRoche principles or LaRoche rules. Sorry. I think that could be I think there's a chance that is a really dangerous offense. And
no, I think even without, like we said, even without these principles we're injecting, that's just the level of offensive talent is super high, right? And so you're arguing that with these principles, that gets taken up to a notch where
it might actually be
not throw passing out the window, but it just becomes kind of negligible.
Yeah, it might be more effective to go for a system like this as opposed to a more
normal
system. Yeah.
Pick and rolls, handoffs, player interactions.
Exactly.
Keeping everyone spaced and separate
Mm-hmm.
with these preordained movements.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of the spectrum there, right? Where like there's this super isolation heavy Noah, what do we say? LaRoche rules?
LaRoche rules.
Okay, we're settled on that on one side. And then it's just kind of what I described, the beautiful game, passing, ball movement, intentional player interactions. And I feel like, yeah, you lean on the high end of that isolation ability. And I stand on the idea that passing can never ever be reductive or duplicative in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have these really, really high level individual creators, shot makers, when you just sprinkle in just like a little salt sprinkle of passing and connectivity on top of that, that added half court variance is what makes these all-time offenses and what we describe as beautiful offenses, because they hum like an orchestra in a way that is like a jazz band. It seems kind of on the fly, but all these players are so individually smart with these random decisions that it, in my opinion, that's what puts championship level offenses on that highest level.
Yeah. I think there's definitely something to that, but I would like to see this explored to its fullest.
And with that,
thank you so much for listening. Leave a like, leave a review. That's always helpful. We have started posting kind of like companion YouTube videos where you can see, we'll take sections of the podcast and kind of put some film examples of what we're talking about. You should totally check out those.
Instagram as well.
Instagram as well, yep.
Handle, Second Season NBA. You can find it there. And yeah, just little quick videos to visually illustrate what we're audibly talking about here.
Again, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.